And we're joined as ever by Royal Report host Caroline de Russo from Perth. And here on the desk, though, I've had to sub out Gemma Tonyuni because she's a Collingwood supporter and I couldn't face her today. And James Macpherson is here. You're a North Melbourne supporter, so you know my pain.
Hey, I know a lot of pain, Chris. I need therapy.
You do. Now, talking about pain, tell me about this, Caro. The polls are not very good for Labor, but one of the interesting nuggets in the latest news poll was on immigration. And they show, unsurprisingly really, that voters want Labor to cut deeper and quicker on migration rates. Hardly surprising given they're at record levels.
Absolutely, Chris. And look, this country's never really been in favour of a big Australia. We've always supported immigration. We know we have to have immigration. And I think generally across the board, most people are totally fine with that. But it does need to be balanced and it does need to be targeted. And we haven't seen that over the last couple of years. And you can play whatever make-believe game that you like, but if you think somehow that you can have 500,000 people or more come into the country and somehow that doesn't put pressure on our infrastructure, well, you're off in fairyland. So there does need to be, at the very least, there needs to be some targeting. I mean, Chris, you think about this. How can we have this many people having come into the country in the last couple of years and still have a skills shortage?
Yeah,
right? No one has been able to answer that question. So if you know, I know there's a whole different raft of people who come into the country, permanent or temporary, for various reasons, but it does need to be looked at. And the Australian public, like I said, they're happy to have immigration, but they want it to be a bit more targeted and a bit more reasonable. And the fact Labor won't touch it is absolutely extraordinary. But they've left their flank way open on this one.
They sure have.
And they cop what they deserve, frankly.
We should have our own version of that inscription on the Statue of Liberty or Ellis Island, shouldn't we? So, but bring me your chippies, your sparkies, your bricklayers.
Absolutely. I mean, what is it? 50% of people say that Labor should have gone further and cut deeper.
Yeah.
But interestingly, 60% of people say that Labor are treating immigration in an unplanned and unmanaged way, which goes to a broader theme that in most things, Labor seem to be unplanned and unmanaged. And so there is a narrative developing that will allow Peter Dutton a real opportunity to attack the Labor Party.
And he's sure doing that. Here's a bit of Peter Dutton.
If the Treasurer is saying that the economy can only function with migration numbers at an historic high, and that the price of that is people not being able to find a home, then I don't sign up to Jim Chalmers' form of voodoo economics. Let's be very clear about it. I believe very strongly that there is enormous economic growth in what we've proposed.
Yeah, and picking up on James's point, I think the fact that you've got the problem with the immigration detainees and you've got boats arriving at Wenges just underscores that it's not well managed. Australians want immigration to be sensible and well organised, not Rafferty's rules, which is what it looks like at the moment. I just want to get on to kids and social media. We talked about this a lot last week. Well, now the Prime Minister's jumped on board.
Parents are worried sick about what their kids have access to online. It is a major social issue in this country. We want to respond positively to the request from parents that we do something about this. We want to make sure that any measures that are put in place are effective, because one of the concerns which is there is that age protocols may be circumvented by users.
Now, James, this is the PM jumping on the bandwagon again. I mean, it's Peter Malinauskas, the Labor Premier in South Australia, who started this, saying we should have laws and practices to make sure kids can't sign up until they're 16. Now, Chris Minns, the Premier in New South Wales, is going to follow suit. And then Albo comes in and wants a bit of the action.
I really want to trust the government on this, but it's hard to trust them taking the welfare of children on social media seriously when they've already talked about misinformation, disinformation laws. We know this government loves to censor their opponents. There's plenty of evidence on that, but there's also a lot of evidence that social media is doing untold damage to our children. 15 years ago, we thought our kids were going to be the smartest generation ever because they'd all have smartphones. But what we've seen in the last couple of years is we're rewiring childhood. They used to have a play-based childhood. Now they have a phone-based childhood. It's doing a lot of damage. So two things need to happen. One, we've got to change social norms. We need to get to a point where it's not normal for parents to give their kids a phone, at least until they're in the middle of their teenage years. Let them have their childhood. But the other thing is, tech companies do need to be responsible. At the moment, we've got the internet with no guardrails whatsoever. Tech companies need to take some responsibility for the damage they're doing to our children. You can't leave it entirely to kids. I just wish I trusted our government to have no ulterior motives in this argument.
Yeah, they do love to censor. It is a worry. We've talked before on this program about the book by Jonathan Haidt on this. I talked to Paul Kelly and others about it. It is terrible what we're doing to our kids, Caro, and I agree with everything that James just said. But the big missing element there is parents. It's about parental control. I know it's not easy, but in the end, parents have to be very engaged in this and make sure their kids don't have access to what they shouldn't have access to.
And they absolutely should be engaged. And look, I have totally support the idea of there being those age caps. But again, this is not something, Chris, where parents go, oh, it's okay, well, the government's looking after that bit, so I'm going to go and do something else. In fact, it's kind of government on one side providing a safeguard, you know, in the broader sense, and then parents in every household with kids doing the exact same thing. Because kids are cheeky, and of course they'll try and find a way around it or whatever. But in any event, if you're a parent with young children, you should know what they are consuming. They all have devices, and some of the kids I know are much better at using and navigating them than their parents. So there does need to be that element at both ends, because both have a responsibility, and I think that needs to be, you know, kept in mind, because this is not something you just simply delegate out to government. Like James said, you know, you want to trust them on this, but then you kind of worry that this here just gets written into the misinformation bill, and then all of a sudden we've got a bigger political issue on our hands.
Oh, I don't want to trust them on anything. I don't want to trust any government on anything. That's the way it is. Quick hit from each of you on two different topics. First up from you, James, knife crime and tougher laws on knives, sure. But in the end, it's about magistrates who let dangerous people out on bail, isn't it?
I mean, this is the perennial problem, isn't it? You can have all the laws you want, but if they're not enforced, and if they're not enforced strictly, then what's the point? So as you pointed out earlier, that gentleman who got bail, I know the court case is pending, but they've got to take a zero-tolerance approach on knife crime.
Absolutely. And Caro, I've got to get your thoughts on the wedding anniversary, Harry and Meghan. That's a royal wedding I actually watched. I thought there might be a few giggles, and there were.
There were, and everyone was really hopeful and excited. And in that 6 years following, it has just been an unmitigated train wreck. It's the sugar anniversary. 6 is the sugar anniversary, but for these two, it's more like a spa to me.
Great stuff. Tell us what you really think. Thanks for joining us, Caro and James.